Where there's thunder, there's lightning. John Nada. One of the reasons that you guys don't get weekly or sometimes even monthly videos from me, and I've realized that every time I've made a video, but I'm working with a computer and I guess computer software, and it's not anything complicated, but it's about 10 years old. It's as old as I guess the channel's been around for about 10 years now. And so it's kind of slow in the going as far as making anything. Sometimes it takes a little bit to get, the photograph, the audio and everything queued up longer than it used to. So for those of you wondering why there's oftentimes quite an absence in between video making, that is one of the reasons. Of course, some of the other causes for that have been due to, work related things. Sometimes you're busier at work than you are other times, and sometimes you just, I don't know, don't feel like making a video. But I'm going to reference something that some of you may or may not be aware of that happened back in the beginning of January, and that was the death of a gentleman by the name of Jeff Baina. I believe that's how you say his name. Now, I didn't know who he was prior to this being announced in January, but it was announced that he had committed suicide, and he was some sort of screenwriter. I'm not really familiar with his work. I know he wrote several different movies and shows and things like that. The thing that seemed to be most notable about him, at least according to the headlines that were written at that time, was the fact that he was married to Aubrey Plaza, who is an actress. She's been in several different shows and movies. I always get her mixed up with Jenna Ortega, who's also been in several different shows and movies, but they both seem to play pretty much the same character. But whenever I saw that, immediately what jumped to my mind was, okay, this guy committed suicide. There tends to be three reasons why people commit suicide. Usually it's some sort of financial downfall or the failure of a relationship, or it could be something in terms of a traumatic experience, maybe something that happened to them in their childhood that they were never able to get over. Maybe it was something that no one could ever get over. Or perhaps they were in a combat environment and had some things happen to them there. Obviously, mental health plays, mental health issues, different things that people deal with, schizophrenia and things like that, that also contributes greatly to suicides in general, not just for guys. But there's a lot of just what you would call just everyday occurrences that can greatly attribute to those things. And so I speculated at that time, what would have caused this guy? Ostensibly he's probably well-to-do, wealthy guy. He's married to this actress. So what happened? Was there something that occurred in his childhood that he just was never able to overcome? Was there a mental health thing? Did something happen financially to him that was going to bring him to financial ruin? But immediately I speculated that something must have happened with the relationship. Now, at the time, there really wasn't a whole lot of information, and I was trying to find out the smoking gun, if you will, as to what was actually going on. And it's only been recently that I wasn't really looking for it, but it just kind of came out in a news feed or whatever that apparently they had been separated since September of last year. And so, not to make this sound like TMZ or a gossip column or anything like that, but I found it to be interesting that was immediately what I thought had happened when the story first broke back in January, that something had happened with the relationship. Either they were going through a divorce or were about to be going through a divorce. And this guy, was not able to cope with that, to deal with that for whatever reason, whether it was simply the loss of the relationship itself, or the loss of the relationship plus whatever financial downfall that might bring about. I don't think they had any children. I really don't even think they'd been married that long. But in all of these instances, it's just like with the Anthony Bourdain suicide a couple of years ago. Stardust did a fairly good rundown of that situation. It's an older video, but it's still a lot of these things that we're talking about, especially in terms of mental health and things like that. It's not like 5 years because a story or something's 5 years old that suddenly it's no longer relevant. It's like, no, these are tales as old as time. So but it was kind of the same scenario there where um, and I don't know his whole backstory, and perhaps I may be speaking out of pocket in general about people I don't really know a whole lot about, but I believe he might have been married once before, Mr. Bourdain. But anyway, he was involved with somebody, and then the relationship ended up failing. And whether or not you could say that was the sole cause, because I think he had dealt with depression and things like that previously. But it just goes to say that it's very interesting when you see a lot of these successful, wealthy guys. Suddenly they commit suicide. Not in every case, but in a lot of cases, there lurks in the background the failure of a relationship. And so I don't really know what the point of saying all this is, the point of the video. I just thought it was interesting because immediately I just kind of knew, hey, this is probably what happened. And sure enough, it is. And so that's one thing, I guess, with having the ability to see these patterns, because I think a lot of us are able to see, the patterns of things and see where things ultimately can lead to. Now, that being said, just talking about suicide and mental health in general, that this is another thing that I'm sure many of you guys have noticed. And I mean, you talk about George Carlin, if he were still here, would have a field day with this. In fact, he already kind of brought up, the softening of the language many years ago in the mid 90s, talking about how shell shock then became battle fatigue, then became post traumatic stress syndrome. Well, now we don't even really have, I don't know, I guess in some ways we have euphemisms for things, but there's countless videos where the topic of suicide is discussed as a part of the story. Maybe it's a story, a true crime story or something like that, where that's not necessarily the focus of the video, but therein that event occurs as a part of the story. And you can't even say that on, in media anymore. You have to say unalive, or you have to just totally censor the word altogether, to the point to where it's like nobody knows what anybody's talking about, because if you say the wrong thing, your video gets demonetized, or whatever the case may be. And I mean, to me, that's just so silly, because then we expect to solve all these problems with mental health and things like this, and yet, but you can't even discuss. Number one, you can't discuss a lot of the causes of it. You can't be honest about what causes people to go this direction, and not only that, but you can't even use the words anymore. So it's very interesting. Times are very interesting. As the book of Ecclesiastes says, nothing new under the sun. So, I mean, this is all, a cyclic thing that we're seeing. There's nothing we're seeing now that didn't occur, at some point before. And so, what is old will be new, and what is new will be old. Inevitably, when the topic of suicide does come up, you always have those people that say, well, that's the coward's way out. And, they were a coward for doing what they did. But I don't think that that's necessarily a black or white issue. I think it's very nuanced, in the sense that I mean, honestly, if we're honest with ourselves, it takes a lot to do something like that. It takes a lot of balls, so to speak, to purposely, exit stage left from the only reality that we can know. I mean, without knowing anything is beyond this. Not to glorify it. I don't think it's something to be glorified, but I understand the decision to do that. I understand why people do it. I understand why some people see that that might be their only way out, or that might be the only way to bring about peace for themselves. So it's one of those things where, you don't really know what's in somebody's mind, what they're going through. I mean, we talk about social media and technology and everything being the bane of existence nowadays, and how it's just driven us apart as, community and things like that. But I don't think that that's entirely true, although I'm sure it has played some role in the disconnect of a lot of people. We do so much online now versus face to face, but make no mistake, the problems that are here today are problems that have always been here. They've been here since the dawn of time. There were many of us growing up prior to all this technology that were, dealing with one issue or the other, particularly the issue of loneliness for men. I think, if anything, the technology that is around today has done great leaps and bounds to cast light onto that whole situation. Whereas before, I mean, I don't remember even 20 years ago people talking about the epidemic of loneliness amongst men. And if you look at the numbers of the younger generation, the people that are in their 20s now, the dating numbers are even lower than they were back, in 2014, 2015, when I first started this channel. I mean, I think I saw a number the other day that like 50% or more than 50% of men don't even bother with dates, don't have girlfriends, not because they don't, not because they are trying to get a girlfriend, but because they've just completely dropped out of that altogether. And so I don't think the technology has created the problems. The technology may have exacerbated those issues, but as Stardust has said many times in his videos, when he was growing up, it was in a time when the same problems existed. We just didn't know what to call them. We just didn't have the terms or the blueprints or the schematics, if you will, to understand what was going on. At least nowadays, so much more so. I mean, again, when I was, in my, early 20s, 18, 19 years old, it's easy to feel like that you're the only person struggling with, an issue or whatever, and you don't really know what's going on. But then once MGTOW came along, and some of these explanations as to, why particularly the dating world is what it is, and that lends itself into other things, in terms of why certain people get the promotion and the other guy doesn't. Then at least you understand that, like, okay, there's a reason behind all this stuff. There's an explanation behind all this stuff. And not only that, but you tend to find other people that are going through the same struggle or experiencing the same thing or noticing the same things that you are. And so then you realize, well, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not crazy. You're not making all this up. You're not, you don't have some kind of weird, skewed view of things. It just simply is that, as I said, the light has now been shown, whereas we had been living in a cave and looking at the silhouette of things. So, with that being said, I know it's, April now. I think the last video I did was in December. I do have some material and stuff that I would like to make another video on, but as just kind of comes and goes as far as me getting these up. So in the meantime, I hope everybody's doing well in the new year. I hope people are pursuing their dreams and thinking about what they want their future to be. Just remember, there's nothing permanent in life, so things can change at the drop of a hat. So always be prepared for that curve in the road. And as always, go your own way or don't. The choice is yours.